Shabbat Shalom. So as we come to the end of a secular year, for those of you who are Spotify users, you get this Spotify Wrapped, like all of the things you listen to this year, which ones you listen to the most and the least. And if you share an account with your spouse like I do, it's a totally separate thing than you ever listen to. So I think for sermons, we should do like Sermon Wrapped. Like, this is what you've heard this year and the greatest hits. So I'll work on that for next year. But it was pointed out to me earlier, a couple of weeks ago, that if I had a phrase that was, this is what Rabbi Witkovksy taught, the way the rabbis in Pirkei Avot get this is what Avtalan said. This is what Hillel used to say. That mine, at least in this last year, if not really my whole career, would be something like there are limits to the benefits of anger. If you've been paying attention in your sermon Wrapped of this year, a trope that was hit often was that there are reasons to be angry, but that there are also limits to what anger can do for us, and sometimes it can even be harmful. And we see an example of this in this week's Parsha and the holiday we're about to go into. So how could I resist one more as we end this year of a sermon about anger? Because it shows up in one moment in the Parsha when Potiphar's wife comes to Potiphar and says, this and this happened. In a euphemism, the Torah leader says, she said, this and this happened, which we all just read what happened. And this happened. Yosef made these advances on me. What are you going to do about it, Potiphar? And it says that when he heard this, Vayichar apo, that he got angry. He became, I think the translation in JPS is furious. He was angry. So we can't deny the anger because the Torah says it. But the commentaries, of course, dig in a little bit deeper. And so they wonder, what is the anger that's happening? So the pshat, of course, is, who is Potiphar angry with? It's like a little bit of a joke there to see what you said. Joseph, right? It seems like the pshat is, he's angry at Joseph for doing this stuff with his wife, right? I brought you into my home, and this is how you repay me, off to jail with you. But most commentaries actually ignore that pshat, and most commentaries give a separate reading, something like he is either, according to Abarbanel and many of the Midrash, he's angry with his wife because and then the commentaries go into different directions. He's angry with his wife because he knows that she is lying and he knows what really happened. He's angry with his wife for bringing it up because now she's created this whole issue. Sforno says that he's not angry at her because of what she's saying in this moment, but he's angry with her because of a past conversation where she complained about Joseph being a Hebrew and how dare you bring this Hebrew into our house. And I have to say, it's a pretty astute read of a marriage from Sforno. Arthur, you can tell us later, right? To say that this fight isn't really about this fight. It's about something that happened years ago, right? Like, it's a great read, but that's what the anger comes from. And I couldn't find someone who says this, but I will. It might be that he's angry not with Yosef, not with his wife, but with himself. It might be he's angry with himself for either creating this situation or not seeing what was going on, or in the way that he's reacting. And anger can do this to us. When we get angry, there are many times, just think, I won't make you raise your hand because it'd be too mean, but has there ever been a time where you get really angry at someone and halfway through it you realize, I'm actually angry at someone else or at something else, or there's another thing? Again, don't raise your hands because it would be all of us. We don't know whom we are angry at in these moments, and often it can be all of us. But anger is a part of our lives. It's a part of who we are. Anger comes to us when there is something in the world that we wish were different than the way that it was, right? That's sort of the core of what anger is. And then when that feeling turns into either guilt because we feel like we've let it become that way, or we feel like we haven't done enough, right? Or it's frustration with others who we think are to blame, then it sort of bubbles and toxifies into being anger. But anger in and of itself can be an okay thing. The rabbis throughout the Talmud, when they talk about anger, they go back and forth. Mostly it is combined with wisdom, which is to say, it is seen as the antithesis of wisdom. The rabbis in the Talmud say that when anger comes in, wisdom leaves. Or there's a great saying from Resh Lakish in the Talmud who says, when a Torah scholar becomes angry, they forget their Torah. When a prophet becomes angry, prophecy leaves them, which is perhaps Resh Lakish's way of looking at all of the prophets who don't do well, right? Jeremiah, who spends his entire life just shouting at everyone and no one listens to him, perhaps because he did it in anger. Jonah, who says 3 words and changes the fate of an entire city, perhaps it's because he didn't do it in anger. But there's this idea that when anger enters into our hearts or into our minds, we lose the rationale. We lose the higher order functions of Torah and wisdom, and they go away. But anger can also teach us something. Right? What can anger teach us? If anger comes from seeing something in the world that we wish it was a different way, then what makes us angry teaches us what we care about. I get angry about the things that are the most important to me. Right? I get angry sometimes about the people who are the most important to me. Right? Because I care about those things. If something happens, down the road that doesn't matter to me at all, you know what? Where did Bob go? No offense. Barak versus Kohelet, doesn't make me mad. I'm happy for you, but it's not something that really gets me angry because, no offense, it's not something I care that much about. But when we look at the myriad of things in our world that can make us angry, we see all of the things that we believe in and that we value, because we wouldn't be angry if we didn't. And there is no greater example of that than the holiday that's going to begin later this week. Because Hanukkah, in its not oil and light story, but in its Maccabee Hasmonean revolt story, basically begins with and is because of anger. The book of Maccabees says in First Maccabees that Mattathias saw a Jew going to Modi'in to make this pagan sacrifice, and he became furious. The same idea, the same thing that happened to Pantavar. He became furious, and so he struck down that person. And then it says all of the Maccabees, in their anger, rose up and slew the Assyrian Greeks, etc., etc. And so the whole beginning of the holiday comes from the anger and the angry reactiveness of the Maccabees over what was happening in the temple. Again, not at the face of it a bad thing to see something and want to change it, to see something they're so passionate about. And you can imagine Mattathias not being able to control himself any longer, and that's why he strikes this person. Their anger served the Maccabees in that moment. It served the Maccabees, one could argue, throughout this war. You need the anger to keep it going. But then, for those of us who know the rest of the story of who the Maccabees become, it becomes toxic. The anger that they have, the zealotry that they have, when it gets down to Herod, becomes something that is focused inward on the people, and it becomes something awful for the nation that they're trying to rule. The rabbis in the Talmud say that anger in your heart is like a worm in your vegetables, like in your plants, that it will gnaw away at you until it eventually kills the root and the whole thing withers and dies. So anger can have its moments, but we have to learn how to get rid of it as well. And so as we go into hopefully a week of rest and break, at least for all of us connected in some way to the academic calendar, we should take a few moments and think about the way that anger has affected our lives this year. Because as we look around, there are plenty of things to be angry about. Legitimate things that we care about in this world that might not be the way that we want them to be. And you know what? In the next calendar year, there's going to be a lot of things that will make us angry, I'm sure, as well. Big and small, personal and large, communal, all of that. Being angry is okay. Getting angry can teach us what we care about. It can even, like Matisyahu, be something that spurs us on to action. And that's a good thing. But we have to figure out how to get rid of it as well. We can't hold on to it because otherwise it's going to confuse us about who we're really angry at. It's going to confuse our actions, and ultimately the plant that we are will wither and die if we can't learn to let it go. The rabbis say that this is easier said than done. Maimonides tells us that this is, and I thank David Tzvi Kalman for reminding me of this Rambam here, that anger, all emotions, all things, one should try to find a middle path. Anger is the one thing that you should try to have none of. Absolutely none. Cut it out completely. So that's one way to try. If you are able to just never get angry, try to limit it always, never let it in, or as soon as you feel a little bit of anger, just let it go, then teach me how. But that's one path, to say I don't want any of this emotion at all. Or the rabbis in the Mishnah say that there are different kinds of people. There are people who are hard to anger and hard to appease once they get angry. There are people who are easy to anger and hard to appease. This is the midah of the rasha, the wicked, they say. There are people who are easy to anger and easy to appease, and then there are people who are hard to anger and then easy to appease. This is the chassid. This is the truly righteous, according to the Mishnah. So it's not necessarily, if you can't be like Rambam, then we can try to be one of these categories. Maybe make it a little bit harder before we get angry. Maybe think for a step or two more before we react in that anger. Or if we're just going to get angry, and we're going to, in some moments, work to be the easy to appease. Work to let it go, work to talk it through, work to just drop the rope sometimes and say, I don't have to pull anymore on this. That's the only way that we can ensure that our community, our people, and who we are isn't affected by the toxicity of the worm of anger gnawing us from within. Shabbat Shalom.